because it does need. I think we talked about it in the phone call as well. The indoctrination, the ideological indoctrination, runs very deep indeed, especially now with the month that we're in. The massive thing at the moment is the pride initiatives and all of these things, and it seems that they just want to get younger and younger with this indoctrination every year. It seems that they want to bring it into comprehensive schools, and then they want to bring it into primary schools, and obviously any parent, as we said, that takes an issue with it, then they could be reported for hate crime or whatever it may be. Did you start to notice any of that kind of indoctrination, particularly, obviously before, but then when you came back as a supply teacher, did you start to notice any of those things being pushed through as well?
Fortunately, I think I would say no. I think my perception is that it's escalated in the last 5 years. You know, we've seen a lot, haven't we, of escalating with like the George Floyd thing that happened during COVID, and you know, yeah, I think it's definitely. My perception is that it's escalated in the last 5 years. But having been out of it, and I'm not in touch with anybody now apart from one teacher. Funnily enough, the teacher that replaced me, I'm in sort of loose contact with her, and she says, "Oh, you know, things have changed so much," and that, you know, yeah. And I did. A friend of mine, her husband was a governor, and he had seen resources that he wasn't entirely happy with that were going to be used for junior age children in order to promote this RSE curriculum, you know? So, yeah, I did go to the, what do they call it now? Public Child Protection Wales. I went to their first annual conference back in February, because I wanted to find out for myself. I'd heard little bits and pieces, but because I'm out of it now, I'm not, you know, I don't follow educational matters that closely. But I thought I want to go and find out more about this in particular, because, you know, I'd heard some really bizarre claims that people were saying, oh yeah, they're teaching, you know, 4-year-olds to masturbate and all this. You know, I thought no, and it was really a really good day, really eye-opening, and you could see it was something I wrote about for TCW then, and you know, it was just basically, you know, parents, grandparents, and professionals who are really concerned about state overreach, because I think the potential is there for, you know, whilst a lot of schools, if you've got sensible staff, because I think really it depends on the subject coordinator in that. You will have someone who coordinates RSE within every primary school and secondary. And so long as you've got people, you know, a governing body and a coordinator perhaps who was sensible, then, you know, most of the things will be age appropriate. But I think from what I heard in that conference that there are more concerns at secondary level, where there are things being brought into the curriculum, you know, mention of bestiality, you know, and changing gender, and you know, this all contributing to this rise in mental health issues with children. Has got to be.
Absolutely. Remember, it's Logan Lansing, his name is, and he wrote a book about the indoctrination that's going on in America at the moment. The whole ideology about it, where again, gender ideology, trans ideology, whatever it is, they're introducing it to children to deliberately sow confusion within them. They're trying to deliberately confuse them as to what is reality. I can't remember the exact terms that he used. You can sum up the entire thing, you know, where people sum up entire points with like 3 distinct words that reference like every single thing. I can't remember the exact words that he used to describe it, but I think it's absolutely right, because that's exactly what it's designed to do. And it is scary that, again, the government is backing this being pushed through the schools at these ages, when again the kids don't necessarily have a full mature what's the word I'm thinking of, not consciousness, but like ability to reason through these things especially when the whole thing is designed for it not to be simple to reason through. It's designed to be complicated, in my opinion, so that they hope the kids will never, reason their way out of these things or anything like that. But yeah, it makes you think, why are education facilities deliberately, when they're meant to help kids make sense of things, deliberately bringing in things that confuse them? It's very, very scary. It's very, very scary indeed, in my opinion.
Yes.
Especially when, as you said, is that you mentioned that was more a comprehensive level in that instance, which would be kids who are between about 10 and 15 in the UK for the most part. We've seen in places like America, at the, with books that are in the libraries and stuff like that, which are outright pornographic. There's a book called Genderqueer, which had illustrations of overt sexual things that they were trying to show to, I believe, what would have been the equivalent of our primary school kids. I believe they were like 8 or 9, I believe. But you said there was the one person that I think you said you talked to or mentioned the concern was that they were teaching like 4-year-olds to masturbate and stuff like that. Can we be confident the moment we're not seeing things like that in the education system?
I think so, because I think most teachers and most heads have got common sense, and they are going to be, and you've got, of course, governing bodies overseeing things. You're going to have things which are age appropriate, but yeah, I think from what I've understand, it's more at comprehensive school level. But then, what worries me is there are so many, a child that doesn't have any sort of additional learning needs, just a normal child, dare I say it. They don't need to be knowing all about these, sexual practices and what have you. They need to be at school to learn life skills, let them, learn it when they're older, like we all did. But the children that I'm worried about are those who are on the autistic spectrum, for example. And I think they're going to struggle even more to come to terms with the things that the messages that they're being told, about different genders and, different sexualities, and it's just going to escalate. The mental health crisis is just going to escalate, I think.
It's already difficult enough for those, people with autism and stuff like that. It's already, difficult enough as it is, and it's difficult enough just for anybody with normal reasoning faculties. A lot of the time to try and make sense of it and to get back to any notion of objective reality, like we were saying, and it's oftentimes, at least from what I've seen, it's people who are either autistic or have some other kind of condition that affects their ability to reason. Those kinds of things are the people that are the individuals that the people promoting this kind of ideology really prey on, and I do find that personally very, very disgusting. That they prey on these people because they're vulnerable. It's the kind of thing where you think anybody that preys on somebody because they're vulnerable, you know what I mean? It's disgusting. And you mentioned, and I think we're going to start segueing into some of the other things we were going to be talking about now, because I remember from our initial call you said there was a couple of other things from your journalism and looking into the Welsh government and those kinds of things that you wanted to bring up, which I thought was going to be really interesting. I can't remember the exact things we talked about back then, because I've slept since then and I didn't sleep a lot last night, so you might have to refresh my memory a little bit. But with regards to your journalism and stuff like that, what things have we uncovered that you'd like to talk about, that you hinted at in our phone call?
Well, I basically started looking into Welsh government. I mean, the first few articles I wrote were COVID related, because I was affected. I had a member of the family that had gone into hospital, and after a fall, and she'd been labelled as being having COVID, even though she was on her own and housebound and had been on her own for 13 days. This is my elderly aunt. And and knowing what we know now about the incubation period, there was no way she had it going into hospital, you know, and even her notes actually stated that they didn't know if she had bacterial pneumonia or COVID. So I had a big interest in what was going on there. And then, I soon realized, I thought, well, I'm not one, I don't watch the news anymore, I'll be honest. I don't watch BBC and Sky, but my husband had them on during the lockdown period. And I suddenly, one day I thought, hang on a minute now, they were starting to talk on Sky News about how wonderful the lockdowns were because it was going to be so much better for the planet, etc., etc. And I thought these lockdowns were, to me, like a mass social experiment, and it was it's become evident since, right? Because I started looking, as I say, into Welsh Government policy, that a lot of the things, a lot of the so-called solutions provided by lockdowns were it was encouraging behaviours that the Welsh Government already had planned, because the Welsh Government was the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency. And things like remote appointments, so not being able to see your GP in person, dealing with them over the phone or whatever, they were actually planned in the Public Health Wales 2017 to 2027 health strategy. And in that strategy, it mentions how the NHS is the largest public sector emitter of carbon, and that, they want eventually that there are going to be more and more remote appointments and things like this. And then I noticed that the Carbon Trust had been working with Welsh Government, with NHS Wales, to see how NHS Wales could lower its carbon footprint. And I just thought, well, for starters, I didn't realise how much of the climate thing was embedded in Welsh Government policy. So that's been an eye-opener. But as I said, I think a lot of the, even about 5 weeks into the lockdowns, we had Jane Hutt, who was then, I think, the Chief Deputy Minister, saying in a statement on the Welsh Government website how we cannot return to normal. And, we're not going to go back to the way we were. And so I thought to myself, well, this was a time when most people should have been or were really worried about their health and really worried about avoiding getting this virus. And that Jane Hutt was there doubling down on the climate emergency. So, yeah. And then I found out so much. I found out that Public Health Wales is the only health agency in the UK to have a collaboration with the World Health Organization. And this is called the International Health Coordination Centre. And they then established a behavioural science unit in May 2022. And this behavioural science unit, from what I can see, is largely geared towards making us compliant with, looking after the planet and reducing our travel and changing our eating habits, etc., etc.
I would say they're quote unquote looking after the planet, quote unquote is what I would say. When it comes to the UN and organizations like that, is quote unquote looking after the planet. I think that's what a lot of politicians like to say, but you don't see them cutting down on their private jet flights or say that they're gonna eat the bugs and stuff like that. But yeah, please carry on. I wanted to get that in. Whenever one of these people, whether it's Jane Hutt, as you mentioned, who I've covered on the podcast before, or any of these other politicians, whether it's at the UN or World Economic Forum. So I believe you said you covered something called the Welsh Economic Forum as well. I believe you said you covered something known as the Welsh Economic Forum.
Well, yes. Sorry. Yeah, I started a Substack specifically about Welsh Government policy. And I called it, a tongue-in-cheek thing, I called it the Welsh Economic Forum. Because there's even one of the articles I wrote for TCW, I can't remember which one it was, but in it, I actually showed that I think one of Public Health Wales's publications actually refers to the World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Fourth Industrial Revolution. You know, so yeah, there's a lot going on that people are blissfully unaware of in Wales, including, you know, they're talking about there was a publication which I came across called Better Homes, Better Wales, Better World. And this was all about how Welsh Government want everybody to decarbonise their homes by 2050. And there will be, they had an organisation called I think it was the Decarbonisation of Homes in Wales Commission or something. And they wrote this report, and they are outlining in the report, you know, how the Welsh Government can get people to comply again. And one of those things, one of the suggestions, which was rather alarming, was that they could link a home's carbon efficiency to the council tax system. So in other words, the more carbon efficient your home is, the less council tax you might end up paying. That's a suggestion, you know, it's nothing set in stone. But it's a bit worrying, to say the least, when you see these ideas being mooted. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about every home needing a home logbook, that the EPCs that you have now, the energy performance certificates, would become home logbooks. And these would be free in the first instance, but then obviously you'd have to pay, and then, you know, and mm-hmm. Like we I've spoken to people. I've spoken to a heating engineer, and I asked him, I said, are you aware of this? And he wasn't. And he said, well, I won't be having one, because he said, my house is 100 years old. It's not suited to them. And not all homes are. And, you know, we actually made an inquiry with our heating engineer. We said, what would, you know, if we wanted a air source or ground source heat pump, how much would it set us back? And it's like £35,000. You know, and yeah.
And I saw something the other day that was really a couple of weeks ago that apparently these things like emit more carbon than they actually take out of the air. That was a really troubling thing which I saw. I think it was a news headline. I think you mentioned was, I'm wondering if they mean when they say we got to decarbonize our homes. I get back to it now. Do they mean I'm wondering when they're going to say about the human carbon as well. That's where my thought is eventually going to come. When are they going to say we need to really decarbonize things? What are they going to do about the human carbon? I wonder.
Exactly. I mean, when you think of it, it's obvious that the more people on the planet, the more, in theory, if you were to believe the government, you know, the more we are killing the planet. So that the solution is to have fewer people. You know,
and just so happens to be that if you're a tyrannical person aimed at one world government, smaller populations are easier to control. It just so happens that those two end up coinciding. But yeah, the heat pumps, and other people have been saying they've had, like, a lot of the times, like, apparently people have been like, they've been trying to coerce people into having them as well. So this is almost, and it's something that struck me with another post I mentioned, is that a lot of the things that governments are doing at the moment, it's almost like they're giving us peaceful alternatives to the initiatives that they have coming into play that they know are going to actually negatively affect us. So it's almost like you pay for this heat pump now, or we're going to do something, we're going to force you to have it later, and it's going to be even worse for you then. So it's almost like, again, we're, some kind of militia or some army comes around saying that, look, surrender your guns now or we'll kill you and take them. It doesn't matter. It's almost like they're saying, yes, surrender your liberties now because you're going to lose them anyway. You might as well just not put up a fuss.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the way that it is.
They're even saying that in the Welsh Government have been bringing out these carbon budgets. So I think the third carbon budget, which is due, this is going to cover 2026 to 2030. They've said that it's going to require a huge step change in emissions, so a 58% reduction, and that they want us to achieve more progress in the next 10 years than we have in the last 20 years. So,
oh God.
that's Welsh Labour. I'm trying to find out at the moment what will, because obviously we haven't had regime change, shall we say, for the last 20 years, 25 years in Wales. I'd like to know what will happen with these publications. They've put out a transport strategy which mentioned things like fair road user charging and elimination of private vehicle use and things. I'd like to know what will happen to all of these policies if we do get a change of government next year. Do they just automatically get scrapped, but then if Plaid Cymru come in, they're pretty much on the same page as Labour anyway. If you look at their manifesto,
in many ways, I'd say they're even worse.
Yes,
in many ways, I'd say they're even worse.
Yes, so
I've seen troubling things as well, where apparently even if I think it was the Doge Wales page, the Senedd Waste page, posted something the other day saying that even if Reform were to win, they were to get the majority of the vote, there's a good chance that the Labour and Plaid Cymru side and the Greens and all of the others could just form a coalition together just to keep them out. And we could be seeing something very similar to what happened in France with Le Pen, or, the Romanian guy's name, the guy who lost out on the presidency recently, where there was allegations of election interference from Moldova and France and those kinds of people. We could be seeing something very similar with that. And obviously we saw scenes from France with riots that were happening in Paris not even a few weeks ago with the Champions League final that were over there. So I'm just wondering how long is it going to be before, whether it's in Cardiff, whether it's in Swansea, whether it's even in a nice Welsh rural town like I'm in now, are we going to see, how, like as you said, they want to do 20 years of progress in 10 years, or more than 20 years of progress in 10 years. That's a very, very scary thought when you consider the trajectory that we're on.
Yes, definitely. And the worrying thing is a lot of this has been set into legislation anyway. So you've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which came out in 2015, the same year as the Sustainable Development Goals were established with the United Nations. And it's actually said that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is Wales's equivalent to Agenda 2030 when you look at it. That there's even a web page which links the two on the Welsh Government website.
And it's mad, in my opinion, now, given that what we recently saw in Westminster with how the recent vote on, again, whatever side of the issue you stand on, I think more people are united on this than anything else at the moment. The decriminalisation of abortion up to birth that recently got voted on. Even when you have people who are pro-choice or pro-abortion up to a certain point saying no, this is bad. That's when you know this bad, when the two sides are often agreeing on something. But then how incongruent is that so many, especially the Labour MPs that we have in this country, like my MP, voted in favour of the abortion up till birth amendment, or the decriminalisation of it, and he also voted for legalisation of it back in 2017 as well. And then they have something called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that it seemed to doing everything possible to not allow those future generations into existence. So it does make you then question, whose generations are they concerned with the well-being of when they're incentivizing, it seems, for British people to not have a future generation. We're told there's too many people on the planet, we shouldn't have kids, it's in many instances evil to have kids, and now they're trying to do everything possible to make it easier and easier by removing legal penalties and such for what I think is like something that 99% of people agree that at least up till birth you're murdering a child at that point. And 99% of people are in agreement over that. So again, They have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that they're doing everything possible to not bring those future generations into existence, or to de-incentivize people bringing those future generations into existence in the first place. It really shows the kind of lunatics, in my opinion, that we really have in the Welsh government. Absolutely.
It's monstrous. It really is. Yeah. Yeah.
But again, what matters more than anything, it seems, is appeasing the the sun god that's going to come and devour us all in the next 10 years, because they've been saying that for the last 60, 70 years now, that the planet's going to heat up and all of these things. And did you see the headline recently? It came up fairly recently that the ice caps have grown. It's the first time ever we've seen the ice caps have grown.
I didn't see the headline, but I'm aware of it because I think I downloaded an app. Can't remember what it was called now, but it was shall I just find it and tell you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that'd be great.
Some very good information, actually. It is called. Hang on. I hope I've still got it on here now. Yes, here we are. And typically when I'm clicking on it now, it's updating. Right. It's called Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. Have you heard of that? And it's
I haven't.
It's good. It's 60 inconvenient facts. And I think it was one of the facts mentioned on there. And it's all substantiated. There's links to everything that's here. Mm-hmm. So it's a handy little resource to keep on your phone if you want to get into it.
I'll have a look. I'll have to see if they've got any man bear pig. I'm not sure if you've seen the South Park episode where they take in the mick out of Al Gore for all of his fear mongering around global warming by saying there's going to be an impending invasion of man bear pig, and it's this organism that's they say half man, half bear, half pig, but obviously that doesn't make sense. It's 1/3 of each. But it's a really funny South Park skit about Al Gore. So I'll see if there's anything with that on there. But yeah, he's been one of the chief cheerleaders of the climate movement. And again, funnily enough, you won't see any of these people from the ivory towers giving up their stakes, giving up their luxuries, giving up their, central heating or their private vehicles. There's no bigger, I can't remember who said it, but it's like there's no bigger symbol of freedom than like an American like diesel guzzling truck, with the flag on the back, and also there's no bigger element. There's almost like no bigger symbol of freedom than that. Obviously, it seems that everything is being done to take freedoms away, whether it's physically in terms of material things that we have, or whether it's rights and privileges such as freedom of expression, freedom of speech, those kinds of things. Just again, I don't see, and again, people will still tell me now that we live in anything resembling a free society. I'm like, I don't see what kind of free society you're seeing. And I do wonder, again, I try to think what it's like to look. You mentioned ignorant bliss. Because that's exactly how I felt in 2020, and 2021, which, as you look back on it now, was one of the most tyrannical times we've ever seen. You mentioned the BLM and George Floyd stuff, for example. It was fine for those guys to go and burn cities like Minnesota, burn police stations down, all of these things, and congregate in their groups. They didn't have to social distance. But there were people that just wanted to take their kids to the park and just enjoy the nice weather and stuff like that, or have, again, social gatherings with their friends. And I'll never forget, I think it was in England somewhere. It might have been in a park in London or Birmingham, one of the big cities. And there was this police van, almost like a riot van, that was going around blaring things out of a loudspeaker, being told to maintain social distancing under threat of arrest and all of these things. Just people that wanted to go and enjoy a nice picnic in the park and enjoy the nice weather that we luckily had around that time. Truly, truly. And I was going through that. I was thinking, I could get used to this. Didn't know anything that was going on. Obviously, it was mass social media censorship at the time as well. I'm thinking, I could get used to this. I look back on it now with abject horror. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. And the government didn't believe their own propaganda. I mean, look how many members of Parliament and members of the Senate were caught, breaking the rules. Yeah.
Matt Hancock and his infamous paramour, I think it was as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But again, and there was so much things said around. It really speaks to the level of lies that we were told as well. When you look back on what we were told about the vaccine and stuff like that, because when we were repurposed from my job at the time, we were volunteering on the vaccination clinics. We were out, myself, I was out in the car park enforcing social distancing and stuff like that, which, as we know, was basically a bunch of bunk anyway. but again, we had to have it before we started in order to, make sure other people were safe, because a lot of people coming in were like 80s, 90s and stuff like that. You can make the case that it would have been good for them, but obviously we were told that, not only to make you less likely to get it, it prevented transmission. So I'm thinking, oh, my dad's elderly and immunocompromised. I'll get it for him so I know that he's safe. And then they walked back that. They said, no, it doesn't stop transmission. And again, all evidence points to them very likely knowing about it in advance, and they just chose to lie about it. And that goes for, Fauci, and that goes for every single politician in between, you know what I mean? Every member of the Senate, every member of Parliament.
Yes, exactly. And my aunt, to go back to the story I touched upon earlier, she went into Landock Hospital with this after having a fall and ended up in a COVID ward. Anyway, she recovered, and this was in April, May 2020 time. But because she had mobility issues, she was then transferred to the Dragon Heart Hospital. Now, the Dragon Heart Hospital was the only Nightingale hospital in Wales which was utilised, despite them spending in the region of £166 million on all of these all of these Nightingale hospitals. Anyway, she was 88 at the time. When she came out, people only got sent there for rehabilitation or for end of life, basically. And it turns out that only 46 people ever went in there. That was verified on, I've seen that on the BBC website as well. And she was one of them. She came out along with a 99-year-old. So obviously this was pre-vaccine. So they had recovered allegedly from COVID. That was never mentioned on the news. All they chose to focus upon was how many people were dying every day. And yes, and to go back to my aunt then, so she came out of hospital, and she actually said to me, I think they're exaggerating it. She said, I saw hundreds of empty beds because they would wheel them out on a nice sunny day to go and sit in the sun. And she saw these hundreds of beds piled up, they were like army beds. And of course she came out of hospital then. She didn't want to have any injections because she had a real fear of needles. So she never had any flu jabs in her life. She didn't have the COVID jabs, but I was visiting every week. And I did chose not to take them as well. So, there would be people out there thinking that I would have been a danger to her. She never picked anything else up. She's never had flu, she's had carers coming back and forth to the house, hasn't picked anything up from them. So, just you wonder what these jabs are doing to people's immune systems, because you hear of so many people who've had the jabs then saying that, they're getting COVID all the time. And of course, if you look at the PCR test, and there's a lot of shenanigans regarding that and how it was. The inventor said it was never designed for, mass testing in the community. It was meant for clinical use only. But he died, didn't he, in 2019.
Conveniently.
There's more questions than answers, basically. And, my aunt got to the ripe old age of 92, bless her, didn't have any vaccinations. And another thing I looked into was it's National Immunisation Strategy for Wales. Now, Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, has promised vaccine transformation in Wales. And when I looked at, I read through and I've written about this immunisation strategy on my Substack, but I looked at the annual conference, I think it must have been 2024 from memory, and it's sponsored by a number of pharmaceutical companies, although it does say, there is a disclaimer at the bottom saying, the hospitality was sponsored by these pharmaceutical companies, and it has no bearing on, what was discussed. And you think, no, come on. Yeah, and of course they're also pushing. This was why Mark Drakeford recently came out and said in a podcast that there are too many hospitals in Wales. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't seen that, no.
Well, it was on the BBC that he'd come out.
If you happen to know what the podcast is or the link for it, please do send it to me and I'll check it out.
Yeah, well, it's on my Conservative Woman or TCW link. It was maybe the last but one article I wrote about. Yeah, it's Will Hayward, who writes for Wales Online, has a podcast. Something like For Wales. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in the article.
Mm-hmm.
He had interviewed him. He had said too many hospitals in Wales, and of course there was all these headlines then about it, and people coming out in outrage. And I actually wrote and I said, he's not mad, he's not bad. I said, please read on. He's actually telling us what Welsh Government have planned, because when you look at Public Health Wales and their vision of the future, they want fewer people going into hospital. They want, more care at home for people. And of course, we've got this, with this collaboration we've got with the World Health Organization, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the World Health Organization and the person who signed it. His name was Dr. Hans Kluge. He's a Belgian national. So he signed it, and Vaughan Gething signed it on behalf of the Welsh Government. And when you look at this Hans Kluge, he wrote the foreword for the European Immunisation Agenda 2030, which there is such a thing, which I didn't realise until recently. And, he is advocating primary care. He's advocating that if primary care is when you go and see obviously a GP, secondary care is if you're sent to hospital. He's advocating, the more immunisations we have, that there would be less need for people to go into hospitals and things like this, and I just think, where's this all heading? It's quite sinister, really.
If the guy sounds like the bad guy from Die Hard 1, I got a feeling this isn't going in a particularly positive direction. His name was Hans Kluge. Is that how you said his name was?
Yeah.
Hans Kluge sounds suspiciously like, is it Hans Gruber, I think, is the bad guy from Die Hard 1. And I do think, oh God, again, it's exactly as you mentioned. It's a very scary direction we seem to be heading in. Not just that, the pace at which we're heading in that direction, I think, is the thing that really scares me. That exactly as you said, in the last 5 years, we've seen so much change. And I just think a lot of people, they still have yet to realize like the depths of the water that we're in, so to speak, like how far we've gone out from shore, if you want to use whatever metaphor you want. And people are just, blissfully unaware that there's these sharks that are circling, you know what I mean? The World Economic Forum, or the Welsh Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the Welsh Government itself, and all of the other initiatives that they fund. So I don't know if you've been seeing on Senedd Waste page recently the octopus analogy that they sort of came up with how the Welsh Government funds all of these different quote unquote charities. Like I believe one of them is the Welsh Race Council, the other one is Sustrans. You've got I can't remember the name of the pro LGBT trans ideologues organization. I can't remember the name. I think Stonewall's one of them. I think they might have a couple on there. Yeah. In fact, what I'll do is, for you guys watching and listening, guys, I'll pull up the actual graphic which they share on their X page all the time, so you can see the ones that are actually linked. I've showcased it on the podcast before, but again, it's like, and it's hard not to see. And I spoke about this with people that I interviewed on the podcast recently. I spoke with two NHS whistleblowers, well, ex-NHS now. One of them's a midwife, one of them is a nurse. I believe you sent the little trailer clip of the conversation I had with Justine Winter, the ex-NHS nurse, to somebody who was also a whistleblower that you knew. I believe you sent her the trailer clip. And it just seems that everything from the NHS, and then obviously it relates back to the Welsh government as a whole, and even higher than that, it's eerily similar to how the mafia families in New York throughout the 60s, even going before that, but especially in the 60s and 80s when they're at the height of their power, how they were structured. And just, I wish people would see more now that it does seem that we are dealing with a crime family-like government, and that's not a good thing. That's really not a good thing. So everything they're doing is, from what I've seen, to the detriment of the Welsh people.
Yeah. And going back to the immunization thing, you can't, good health is not injected, is it? You've got to, people are not given enough information really about just general, getting outside in the sun, getting vitamin D, eating a really clean, healthy diet.
Well, they want to dim the sun now. They want to dim the sun now, don't they?
Exactly. It's just bizarre. And how people still not waking up, I don't know.
I had a conversation with somebody whom I've interviewed on the podcast before as well, and I was talking about the fact that so much of the Welsh farmland is covered in solar panels now, especially where I live at the moment. There's an area just on top of the mountain behind me, which, as far as I know, at least the guy who owns the land, it was farmland, at least at one point, as far as I know. And we went up there for a music festival last year. And, because they said, it's at this location and it's named a farm. And I was like, oh, okay. But when you go up there, it's nothing but solar panels for as far as the eye can see. And I'm like, this is terrifying. I woke up there and I felt sick to my stomach, and my girlfriend was with me in the car. I was like, what the hell are you on about? I was like, this isn't good. Trust me, this isn't good. And it played on my mind the whole time that we were up there. But I had a conversation back and forth with somebody on X at one point. I was saying, yeah, well, just up by me, they've covered all the lush green farmland with solar panels. It's a travesty. And he's like, yeah, that's going to be great now when they dim the sun. That's going to be great now when they dim the sun. They cover everything with solar panels and then they dim the sun. And then we wonder again why we're having, not only very expensive energy bills and stuff like that, but a lot of the times it just doesn't seem to work.
I know. We're ruining the planet to save the planet, apparently. And then you think, the successive governments have been saying for years how the planet's going to die, we're killing the planet. They've let us come to this point, and then they're expecting us to now go into reverse thrust, in the next few years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which...
again can be summarized basically in rules for thee but not for me.
Yes,
when it comes to the lead executives at the UN and World Economic Forum and places like that. Nicola, is there anything else you'd like to go into? Any other topics which we haven't covered that you wanted to bring to the viewers, listeners, and my attention?